Activate torpedo mode!
Hey guys, it's the Eliminator speaking, and in honor of lettuce grilled bacon tomato quarter pounders, I thought now would be a good time to wrap up our time with the symbiotes. So today we're going to be talking about Venom: The Last Dance, and by extension, the end of the Sony Spider-Man cinematic universe. Wait a minute, didn't Kraven the Hunter come?
Shut up! Oh my god, I don't care!
Anyways, that said, let's get started. Alrighty, similar to the section I did on Let There Be Carnage, I think it would be good to start with the story, so that way we don't have to worry about tiptoeing around spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie, go and watch it. But if you're here, you probably have, or you just don't care. So, with that said, let's begin. In Venom: The Last Dance, Eddie and the symbiote are out on the run after the events of Let There Be Carnage, and in a last-ditch effort to maintain some semblance of normalcy, attempt to run to New York in the hopes of bribing the judge to get Eddie's life back. A wrench is thrown into their plan, however, when the two are attacked by a monster known as the Xenophage, which serves the King in Black, Knull, who was imprisoned on the symbiote's home planet millions of years ago, and is now hunting them down because of the codex that they house within them, which would allow them to escape. Worse still, the US military is also hunting the two of them down for events in previous movies as well, and they've already captured a nice variety of symbiotes, while also getting word of Knull's impending arrival. Now, Eddie and Venom's relationship is put to the ultimate test as they have to race for survival against all odds. In terms of pacing, I'd say that the story is similar to the first Venom movie, where this one is a bit longer and generally has more time to breathe within its scenes. At the same time though, there is a lot more happening in this movie than the first one. And even then, it's not like the first one was great. I definitely embellished a lot of details in that video. But one thing I will say about the first movie is that it definitely felt a bit more focused. Like, things were moving forward. You had Riot making its way to San Francisco, Carlton Drake trying to experiment on the symbiotes, and then trying to catch Eddie after he escaped with one. And then you had Eddie trying to take out the Life Foundation, while also playing keep away with the symbiotes. With all those plot points finally converging at the end, when Riot makes its way to Carlton Drake, informs them that there are more symbiotes, and then Eddie and Venom have to stop it. Meanwhile, in this movie, you have Knull and the Xenophages trying to find Eddie and Venom because of the codex they house, the military is trying to find them for the symbiotes' antics in the previous movies, this random family that wants to see Area 51 before it's decommissioned, which just so happens to be where the military is hiding out, and then, as the main plotline, or what is supposed to be the main plotline, you have Eddie and Venom trying to make their way to New York. Now, you're probably thinking that, aside from the family subplot, that it's pretty similar to the first movie, but that's the problem. Most of the stuff with the military is them either spinning their wheels or failing to catch Eddie and Venom, either relaying information we already know, or making it no closer to their goals until the plot calls for it. Knull literally can't participate in the story, and so he has to send his servant dogs out to do the work for him. And when Venom dies at the end, he takes all the servant dogs with him, meaning that Knull is no closer to the goal from where he started. Aside from bringing Eddie and Venom to Las Vegas, the random family doesn't really add much else to the story and kind of just pads things out. And then Eddie and Venom make no real tangible progress in getting to New York City. And so as a result, it's harder to root for their situation, since they don't really seem to get any closer to their goal, much like everyone else. Honestly, with how things play out, it feels a lot more in line with the story of Let There Be Carnage, where all the characters are basically just doing their own thing up until the third act. And so as a result, it feels like things take a lot longer to get going. But walking it back to the characters, I think it would be good to focus on them now, starting with Eddie. Despite being one of the main characters, and the one to suggest going to New York in the first place, Eddie feels more like a passenger in this movie, being jerked around by the symbiote and thus forced to participate in its antics, which is especially apparent in his personality, where he's basically just done with everything that's happening. I mean, it makes sense. Eddie's been through the ringer, but at the same time, it makes him feel more uninvolved in everything, despite seemingly having a stronger bond with Venom than ever. I mean, yeah, the two of them get along, but at the same time, with how disgruntled Eddie is, he feels more like that friend that's being dragged along because the other friend invited him. Like, despite literally being on a ticking clock, Eddie constantly looks like he could be wanting to do something else or has better things to do, despite being, the main character. Venom, meanwhile, is just the complete opposite. He's down for pretty much everything that happens in the movie, save for the obvious things like the main villain coming to get them. As I also graciously spoiled in the story section, Venom dies at the end in order to keep Knull from getting the Codex. And so, all of his actions throughout the movie are less about him just being all his usual goofy self, and more so him acting with the knowledge that he's not going to make it out of this. So he's just trying to live it up, basically completing a bucket list. And while I do think it's funny, I definitely take issue with some of the ways that it's handled. Like at one point, Eddie and Venom are hanging out in a penthouse, and Venom wants to go dancing, and he winds up doing the full transformation, which is what would allow Knull to track them down, despite the fact that Venom can literally puppet Eddie's body around with no issue, or any sign that he's the one doing it, which then leads to them being captured by the military. Obviously, it's basically just a vehicle for the third act, but at the same time, a lot of people have actually pointed out that something they could have done was have a situation occur where the two were forced to fully transform, and so it would at least be them having no real choice. And to add to that, I think a fun idea would be that it's actually a setup from the military so that they could draw Eddie out. But anyways, moving to the third act, I really like how it plays out. As has been mentioned, it was pretty much the part where the movie really started to get going, with all the plot threads coming together at the end. The xenophages track Eddie and Venom down to Area 51 where they're being held by the military, and then all the other symbiotes have to be released in order to fight them off, with them slowly getting picked off one by one. And as the whole battle rages on, Eddie and Venom realize that they aren't really gonna make it out of this, at least not together. And so Venom makes a sacrifice, like I mentioned earlier. And while admittedly the movie didn't do a great job of building it up, I really like how the movie kind of makes you dread seeing this whole thing happen, because the two were together this whole time. Even if they didn't show much progression towards getting to New York City physically, they were always talking about all the stuff they were going to do once they finally succeeded in their plan. And in the end, the plan came to fruition, just in a different way. Eddie got what he wanted, but he literally had to lose a part of himself to do it. And not only that, he literally has no one he can share it with. And so the movie ends on a surprisingly bittersweet note that is admittedly undone by he who shall not be named. That and the movie's post-credit scene, like anyone would show up after this, is literally called Venom: The Last Dance. But that aside, I'd say we're done with the main duo, and by extension, all the characters in Venom: The Last Dance. But Al, you literally cut out the entirety of the supporting cast. Well, I wouldn't exactly classify them as characters. Just do it! Alright. As I mentioned in the story section, the Roundup family really doesn't add anything to the movie, and aren't really much of characters themselves. At least the two children aren't. The parents are presented as being sort of conspiracy theorists / hippies, but there isn't really much beyond that. I mean, they do try to have this one scene with the younger son where he's nervous to see aliens, and so Eddie has to reassure him, and it gets paid off at the end when he has to save them all after they break into Area 51, but again, they don't add anything overall. But at least they're better than nothing, also known as Knull. Stay focused. Alright. Anyways, Knull is basically nothing in this movie. He sends the xenophages out to get Eddie and Venom, but that's literally it. All you can do is sit back and watch for obvious reasons, but as a result, it doesn't help his character, especially since the movie starts with him. I think the smarter thing to do in this case would have been to have miscellaneous events play out, like the xenophage attacking Eddie and Venom, or Detective Mulligan being brought into Area 51 by the military. And then as the movie progresses, you start to learn more and more about Knull and see just how connected everything is. So then, in the climax, when he's trying to get the Codex, it feels a lot more intense because of how he's being built up, similar to what they did in like the Ghostbusters movies. And then you have the US military, who take up space and really don't add anything that Knull doesn't already. Like, none of these guys really have any specific personality traits beyond their generic purposes. You have gruff military general, you have slightly eccentric scientist, and then you have someone who happens to like Christmas. They serve as a different obstacle for Eddie and Venom on their path to New York, as they are antagonistic, but they aren't completely evil like Knull is. However, they really don't contribute much to the narrative despite that. Like, Carlton Drake was a nothing character, but a lot of his actions in the movie actually moved things forward. He's the one that brought the symbiotes to Earth. He wasn't just experimenting on them randomly. Not only that, but due to the lack of suitable hosts for them, the symbiotes are all dying off. And worse still, Eddie manages to escape with one of them, and winds up being the only successful pairing in the process. Couple that with the fact that Eddie came really close to exposing all their shady dealings earlier in the movie, and as a result, you have a villain who has a much more personal motivation to go after the hero. Not only that, but when Riot finds Drake and manages to bond with him, he learns about all the other symbiotes out in space, which immediately ratchets up the tension since we know Drake has the ability to bring more to Earth. And thus, he's more credible as an antagonist. Then you have Cletus Cassidy, who was already a dangerous guy on his own, but then proceeds to get powers beyond his wildest dreams thanks to an altercation with Eddie. Not only that, but Eddie also basically cheated him out of a plea deal, since Venom was the one to help him solve the case of where all of Cletus' victims were buried. Then couple that with the fact that his partner has powers rooted in the main character's biggest weakness, and, like I said before, you have a very credible antagonist. Not only that, but in the same movie, you had Detective Mulligan going after Eddie due to his connections to the symbiote as he slowly starts to piece everything together. Venom 3, meanwhile, lacks anything resembling these guys, and as a result, it kind of falls flat. But with that, we've basically reviewed all the characters in Venom: The Last Dance. For real this time. Honestly, despite everything I've said about this movie, I don't hate it, but I definitely feel like there are things it could do better. Now, since this is the last time we'll be talking about these guys, I think it would only be fair to rank their movies in this video, since I don't really think they'll be making it to the Trilogy Awards this year. Now, if it wasn't obvious, in third place we have Venom: The Last Dance, for everything mentioned prior. Now, in second place we have the first movie. I've definitely had time to look back on that video I made, and like I said earlier, I definitely embellished a few details of it. If I was to cite the movie's biggest strength, I'd say that it's competently put together for the most part. However, for its biggest weaknesses, I'd say is that you can very easily tell what the movie's trying to be. It's trying to be a superhero movie that's the springboard for a larger cinematic universe. And as a result, that leaves you laughing at the movie as much as you do with it. And so, this lack of self-awareness leads to it falling short. Now, in first place, we have Let There Be Carnage. I know that I described Let There Be Carnage as being a somewhat messy movie. At the same time, however, unlike the first film, Let There Be Carnage is a lot more self-aware of what it is. And as a result, it doubles down on it, being the sequel to a movie that probably didn't deserve a lot of the success it got. As a result, it knows how ridiculous a lot of the stuff within it is, and so it just has fun with it. And as a result, you have fun watching everything play out. So, like the bond between a symbiote and its host, it's a very solid balance. But with that, I'm afraid I've said everything I wanted to say about Venom: The Last Dance, and the Venom trilogy as a whole. Honestly, it's impressive that we got to 3 movies to begin with, given what they are at their core. And yet, here we are. So with that said, let's wrap up the video. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to tell me down in the comments section what you thought of Venom: The Last Dance, and what your personal ranking for all 3 Venom movies is. Also, as a bonus question, how would you want to see the character depicted in movies going forward? As always, be sure to like, share, and subscribe today to join the A-list. And have a great day. Bye!